Hey, this is Connor from Biker's Edge. Today we're talking about the Orbea Rallon. I've been itching to throw a leg over this bike ever since it came out last summer. It's got rowdy geometry, a lot of travel, EWS race intentions. But if there's one thing I know about Orbea is that they don't skimp on uphill performance. They design their bikes to get you to the top of the mountain as well as they get you back down it. So does the new Rallon fit the mold? Stick around to find out. So the new Rallon saw a ton of geometry updates. The travel actually stays the same at 160, 170, but it got a lot slacker. It's now 64 to 64.5 degrees, depending on the flip chip setting or which rear wheel size you have. The Rallon is designed to run either a full 29 setup or a mullet setup, and they even give you a little link so that you can swap back and forth. The seat tube angle is steep, it's right where you want it. The reach is long and roomy, and it gives you a pretty decently long wheelbase without going overboard. So how does this thing ride? Let's get into it. Alrighty, Orbea Rallon. I've been waiting a long time to ride one of these. I am hot on the heels of riding the new Santa Cruz Mega Tower, so probably going to be talking about that bike quite a bit. I have a feeling that they're going to feel very different. Wow, this one's got some get up and go. Kind of expected that coming from Orbea though. Their bikes tend to feel that way. Quick to accelerate, efficient, firm pedalers, and this one's no exception to that rule. Apparently I need to do a better job of this because everybody asks me, and it does seem important. I'm 6'2", and I am riding an extra large. So far, the fit is pretty spot on. Holy! I got stuffed on that root. Dumb. I thought I was gonna get that one. I got all excited. That's a pretty tough little climb right there. Even with big aggressive tires, a coil, rowdy geo, I like how this thing goes uphill. So right now I'm in the full 29 setup, and I'm in the lower of the two geometry positions, but I've got a 27.5 wheel with me and the link to convert it. I'm generally a 29 or die kind of guy, but we'll see how that mullet goes. So this isn't the rowdiest enduro bike I've ever ridden on paper or in ride feel, but you know, it feels like it gets after it well enough, but it feels really agile and nimble. So first impressions, the bike is more agile and maneuverable than it is monster trucky, cloud, make rocks disappear kind of feeling bike. Carries speed really well, regains its speed when it loses it very quickly. A couple pedal strokes and you're going again, off to the races. Oh yeah, this thing rips corners. We've got a stupid wall of water bars right up there. I've tried it a handful of times and I've never made it. Sick. I've tried that so many times and never made it. Well done, Rallon. All right, now it's time to swap out for the mullet. I'm gonna do some parking lot mechanicking. Just swapped over to mullet mode. Nothing feels very different at all. Feels like I'm riding the exact same bike. I was in the low mode on the geometry flip chip before, so now that I'm in mullet mode, geometry should be super similar to where I was. It's different. It is easier to push that back wheel into a corner when you're like pumping through a corner for extra grip. It's easier to do. I don't know if it's really all that different though. Woo! I don't think it would be too off base to call this
a long travel, all mountain bike. That's not to say I don't think it's capable. I just think the handling, the climbing, a lot of factors more closely resemble the all mountain bikes than they do kind of modern enduro bikes. All right, so that's gonna wrap it up for this ride. We're gonna head back to the garage, see where this thing shines, see who it's good for, and if it's the bike for you.
I don't know why I was surprised given Orbea's climbing pedigree, but the Rallon goes uphill very, very well. It handles tech climbs, it handles wide open, fast fire roads. So if Orbea knows how to do one thing very, very well, it's how to make a bike pedal efficiently. Even on their long travel 160 mil enduro bike, it pedals very efficiently. It has that quickness to it. It has that fast to accelerate sports car feeling where you get on the pedals and the rear wheel starts spinning up. My test bike had a Fox DHX2 coil on it, and even with that, there's no pedal bob. But it's actually pretty smooth too. It's smooth enough that it lets you get up and over rocks and roots, even wet rocks and roots. Keeps that rear wheel digging into the ground so that you can move forward and up and not just spin out. In fact, I know it's really dumb, but there was this like wall of water bars that I've tried to clean before. It goes up to the parking lot. It's stupid, but it's, I don't know, 5 or 6 water bars with a bunch of rocks, and it's really steep. I've never cleaned it before, but I actually got it on the Rallon, which is impressive because that's a long travel bike. But I think it's because it strikes a really good balance between efficiency and traction and control. So on Orbea's website, they have a little section about the geometry that says it is slack enough to handle the toughest tracks without compromising on agility. And that really shows through even on the climbs. The bike is slack without going overboard. And that's what keeps that wheelbase under control so that you can pick your way through tight switchbacks, through rocks. You don't just have to go straight because you can't get the bike to turn. The bike also feels really balanced. It has a semi-longish chainstay at 440 millimeters. So for me on an extra large, that puts me pretty well in the center of the bike, which makes it climb better because you can have both wheels equally weighted while you're sitting down. So I think you combine that good seated climbing position with a lot of efficiency and you can get up just about anything. So while I was doing my testing, I brought a spare 27.5 wheel with me and I did some parking lot mechanic stuff and swapped over halfway through so I could get a feel for both. So climbing on the mullet or the mixed wheel size was actually mostly positive. Zach and I talked about this a little bit where the smaller back wheel, given you have the same gearing and the same power going into the bike, should spin up faster. It should accelerate a little bit quicker. I'm no engineer, but I did okay in physics and it only makes sense. It has a shorter radius, so it should be easier to turn. So I didn't really notice too much on wide open climbs where you're up to speed or just kind of cruising along, but I noticed it a little bit more on technical stuff. Normally where you have a full 29-inch bike, you kind of pop the front wheel up and over the little ledge or step up and then lurch the back wheel up and over. On the mullet version, it was easy just to kind of pop the front wheel and then just keep that back wheel spinning. It didn't require that like lurch or that push to get that back wheel up and over the ledge. And then I did notice it a little bit on steep stuff too. The bike felt easier to keep spinning. When I was getting on really steep stuff where I'd be stalling out or kind of in my easiest gear and it's still not easy enough, the mullet just felt a little bit easier to keep that back wheel turning. And because of how the Rallon does the mullet conversion, the chainstay actually doesn't shrink. Unlike that Heckler where the chainstay got shorter and I felt like I was falling off the back of the bike, I didn't have that on the Rallon. So it feels the same, so you still feel very well balanced between the two wheels. So honestly, on the climbs, the mullet was kind of all smiles. It was mostly benefits. So now let's jump into the downhill. The Rallon isn't the burliest enduro bike I've ridden, on paper or on the trail. Instead, it seems to place a little higher priority on agility, maneuverability, being able to pick and choose your line. You know, there's that saying that says, jump for show, corner for dough, and the corner for dough makes a lot of sense. The faster you can get through a corner, the faster you're gonna get to the bottom of an EWS track. And I would argue that pro EWS racers don't need quite as forgiving of a bike as you and I might need to get down one of those tracks. They're good at bikes. They've got the bike handling skills. So they might actually benefit more from a bike that's a little more maneuverable and a little more agile so they can get through corners faster. I know those European tracks are super tight, so a smaller bike that's not quite as slack might actually be advantageous. Luckily for you and me, that makes this bike super versatile for people who aren't always trying to go the fastest down the roughest, nastiest tracks. So jumping into the suspension on the downhill, it had a very kind of fast and firm, supportive feel to it. Even with the coil shock on it, it wasn't gooey, it wasn't vague. You could feel the trail. You got a lot of feedback from the trail. And that's a really good thing when you're trying to pump the trail or unweight, because it doesn't rob you of all of your energy and momentum. That suspension makes it very easy to pull up and unweight, bunny hop over rocks or roots, and it also makes it fun to just goof around on all the little side hits and jumps. You get a lot of return for your energy that you put into pumping. I actually found myself taking a lot of different lines on this bike than I'd normally take. So instead of trying to go around or swing wide or just kind of plow through rock gardens, I would kind of take inside lines or go up and over rocks or over technical sections where I could just unweight. I wasn't plowing through those sections. I was popping and unweighting and bunny hopping over them. A wise man once told me the less your suspension has to move, the faster you're gonna go. So if you can pop over something or unweight over a rough section of trail, you're gonna go faster. I did notice the back end on this bike getting hung up a little bit from time to time, really only on fast, harsh square-edged hits, especially with the smaller wheel in the back. It would kind of grab a rock and get stuck just a little bit. But I think that's the trade-off for having this firm, supportive, lively suspension. So it's not the kind of bike where you're just going to close your eyes and mindlessly plow through the nastiest bits of trail. I think it's more the type of bike where you need to pick good line. But that's what makes it fun to ride. It's fun to kind of pick up and unweight over a nasty section of trail rather than stay on the ground and just plow through it and let the bike do all the work. So it's a rewarding ride, especially for someone who's got a little bit better bike handling skill. That's also what makes it a nice option for people who aren't always riding like a bat out of hell or riding super aggressively, because it doesn't punish you on easier, slower speed terrain. So by far the standout feature on the Rallon on the descents was its just laser precise handling, especially in the corners. I think it was a smart move for them to keep that wheelbase a little bit shorter, the front end not quite as slack, because this thing rips a corner. It is so much fun in the corners. It doesn't take this huge, massive effort to get the bike leaning or to initiate a corner. You can kind of come in and just push the bike through it. It hooks up really well. It has a lot of traction still. It actually does really well in tight corners too. So I think if you live on the East Coast or you ride really tight technical terrain a lot, it's going to be a good bike for getting around that type of corner. So on the climbs, while the mullet version was pretty much all positives, it was a bit more of a mixed bag on the descents. Like I mentioned earlier, the back wheel would hang up a little bit more on that smaller wheel, and it just didn't carry its speed quite as well. And for me, the full 29-inch version isn't unwieldy or cumbersome enough that you really need the smaller wheel size for the descents. I will say the bike maybe felt a tiny bit quicker and a little bit easier to push the back end out into a corner when you're like trying to pump through a corner for extra grip or to generate speed. I think the small wheel did that a little bit better, but keep in mind your wheelbase isn't shrinking when you make this a mullet bike, because that chainstay stays the same. So you're not really getting the full benefit of the small back end because the chainstay stays the same. So I really don't think it was a big difference either way, but I did like the rollover capability of the 29-inch better, and I don't think there were really all that many benefits to just a smaller back wheel. Okay, so let's do a couple of comparisons here. I just barely finished the Santa Cruz Mega Tower review, so obviously that came to mind while I was riding this bike. On paper, they look pretty similar. The geometry's close. The Rallon's just a little bit steeper on that head tube angle. Travel numbers are very similar. On the trail, they felt very, very different. The Rallon feels very scalpel-y, very precise, very firm and supportive. The Mega Tower feels a little bit softer, plusher, more capable, more grounded, even though for the category it still rides really light. I think the Rallon beats it on the climbs, but if I had to go down the nastiest, roughest track around, I'd probably take the Mega Tower. So the next bike that comes to mind is the Rocky Mountain Altitude. That's also kind of on the steeper, shorter wheelbase side for an enduro bike. And it's funny, Orbea and Rocky Mountain both do very, very well in the EWS, and they have a very serious race program. So it's funny to see that their enduro offerings are maybe a little bit shorter, a little bit steeper. Maybe there is something to being able to get around a tight corner faster and being able to win EWS races. So the Rallon and the Altitude are very similar on paper and on the trail. I think the Rallon climbs better, and then they're very, very evenly matched on the descents, where the Rallon is a bit more precise and firm and supportive. The Altitude is a little bit plusher, softer, and tiny bit more confident. So you can't talk about the Rallon without talking about the Occam, which is just, one step below. I've always described the Occam as a long travel trail bike, not an all mountain bike, because its handling, its climbing ability is a little bit closer to the trail bikes than it is the rest of the all mountain bikes. And I don't think it'd be too off base to describe the Rallon that way as well. Its handling, its climbing ability is a lot more like an all mountain bike than it is a full-blown burly enduro bike. So you can really tell that both of these bikes are made by the same brand, and that brand values climbing performance, it values versatility, it values agility and being able to corner. So I think if you've ridden an Occam and maybe you want just a little bit more out of it, but you still want it to feel kind of like an Occam, I think the Rallon's a good bike for you. And lastly, this one might come out of left field. I'm going to compare it to the Ibis Ripmo. So this has more travel, it's a little bit slacker, a little bit more aggressive than the Ripmo, but it feels a lot like that Ripmo. The Ripmo's easy to get off the ground, it's easy to corner, it's just really fun to ride. The Rallon feels that way, but maybe shifted up the burly scale just a tiny bit. They both climb super well, they both descend well, but they're both mostly a ton of fun to ride, especially in the corners. They don't penalize you on tight, slower speed terrain. So I think they're actually pretty similar. So who is the Rallon for? Because of its very all-mountain handling, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it to anybody looking for a do-it-all bike. Because of how well it climbs, I would recommend it to folks trying to do really big, long days with a ton of vertical. I think folks who really prioritize or value quick handling over just all-out capability will also get along really, really well with the Rallon. And I also think it will suit folks who have a lot of slow speed trails or a lot of tight, twisty technical trails, because it isn't bad on that type of trail, and it still has quite a bit of travel and slack geometry for when things do get a little more high speed and a little bit rougher. I think if you're a fairly average to intermediate expert rider and you're trying to push the pace on really, really rough, nasty terrain, you're gonna have to have the bike handling skill to get away with that on this bike. That's not to say the bike isn't capable, but it's just not the bike for plowing mindlessly through rock gardens at ludicrous speeds unless you've got the bike handling skills to back that up. So the one-line bike review for the Orbea Rallon, just to wrap this thing up, it's got laser precise handling combined with a firm, fast, efficient, and supportive suspension feel for getting down a mountain as fast as possible. So thanks for sticking around. We'll see you next time.